If Dogfish board members can please take their seats, we're going to get started. Call the February 1st Spiny Dogfish Management Board meeting to order. My name is Nicola Mazur from Massachusetts. I'm joined up front by Caitlin Starks, the FMP coordinator for ASMSC, and also virtually we have Jason Didden, the Mid-Atlantic Council staff, who will be helping us with some information for our specification setting action item. You have before you an agenda for today. Are there any modifications to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll consider that approved by consent. We also have minutes from our last meeting in January of 2022. Are there any revisions to the minutes? Seeing none, we will consider those approved and move on to public comment. This is a time for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone that would like to make comment in the room or virtually? Any hands? No hands for public comment, so we will move on to setting the 2023-2024 specifications. This is a final action item, but first we will receive a presentation from Jason and Caitlin as well. So when you're ready, Jason, go ahead.
Thank you. You can, perfect. Okay, so looking at 2023 Spiny Dogfish specifications, I'm going to run through basically the materials that the council's focused on leading into their setting of specifications. Next. Currently, we're at an ABC of about 17,500 metric tons. That's really built off of the 2018 assessment. It leads to almost a 30 million pound quota. And that's kind of what we're operating under right now. And on the federal side, it's an open access fishery, 7,500 pound federal trip limit that was changed last May. And then we have the regional and state quotas and trip limits that you all set. Next. So we just wrapped up a research track assessment. It was well reviewed from a methods perspective, but the landing trends are down, the indices are down. That usually doesn't end well. I mean, the biomass trend since 2012, I believe, is down. I think in 2019, the terminal year of the assessment, it wasn't overfished, but it's more or less headed in that direction. We'll get a 2023 management track assessment. That'll determine stock status in future ABCs. We're not using the research track assessments for that. We'll wait until we update the data with the management track assessments. You know, if I had to, you know, bet, I would bet we'll either be overfished or close to overfished when that comes around, given landings and the indices have been trending down in the subsequent years. The assessment went through 19, then we got 20, 21, 22. And again, the indices and landings were not real positive in those update years. So anyway, we won't know until that gets done and reviewed, but it doesn't look great. Next. Just backgrounds on the federal quota and total landings. Again, the landings tracked up with the increasing quotas during the rebuilding period, but since 2012, have been overall trending down below the quota, except we're pretty close in 2019. Next. Just dogfish prices in 2021 dollars. You can kind of see the erosion trend from 2008 to 2013. But then since 2013, fairly stable with a bit of an increase in real prices. Next. Just an update on where things stand roughly right now. We're at, still well below the quota. trajectory. Landings have been tracking in 2022 fishing year very similarly to 2021. Here, 2022 is in blue. The last few weeks, landings have increased a bit more than the same time last year. So we're a little bit above of last year at this point. These lines definitely preliminary, especially with the transition at NIMS to CAMS, data processes for quota monitoring. But that's approximately where we are this year and last year. And again, the fishing year is a May 1 start. Next. We've got some requests at the council meetings for a little more info on like time of year landings for states, and some of that kind of got into confidential data, but summarizing, just for background, northern areas, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, mostly Massachusetts, you have landings start in June, wrap up in early October generally, and through all three of these areas, they kind of, it's that they start off low, they trail off low, and the kind of strongest in the middle of these month periods. New Jersey and Maryland, mostly late October to December, a little bit in spring sometimes. And then Virginia is mostly late November to early April. So just kind of a sense of the transitioning through the year of where landings occur. Next. Just trends in vessel participation. You can see that, like landings themselves peaking out around 2012, so did vessel participation and has been trailing off since then. Next. We have our advisory panel provide kind of commentary on their perspective on the preceding fishery year performance. They continue to flag that COVID-19 didn't have a huge impact on the dogfish fishery, but demand was low before and is still low, has been fairly stable. Their sense is that the market could support a bit more landings if vessel participation production increases in terms of the markets that they're targeting, but again, landings have been fairly low. Next. Reasons for those landings that have been flagged by our AP include just better opportunities in other fisheries, like oysters and shrimp in Virginia. And there continues to be interest by some, but not all, to keep bumping the trip limit up to get more vessels participating. And the councils have kind of had trip limits on, as a topic of interest for a number of years. It's kind of been, I think any further increases beyond the 2022 increase to 7,500, I think is kind of on hold until we see the final results of the management track and have a better sense of what might be upcoming for spiny dogfish. Next. The advisory panel continues to provide input that they have a lot of concern about the science on spiny dogfish. And they tend to focus on, is the survey covering where the dogfish are, and how is the survey been performing in terms of when it leaves the dock, when it's hitting different areas, does that create extra noise in the indices? And then there's been some work on fish behavior in recent years that kind of have flagged some interesting findings about migration patterns of spiny dogfish and time spent off the bottom. And for the previous way we were assessing spiny dogfish, it was more or less a swept area biomass expansion where the survey coverage and the fish behavior issues become really acute because you're just expanding up from the area you surveyed to the total area to get a ballpark on biomass. The new assessment, and there's some backgrounders on this the other week at New England and next week at the Mid, moving to a more standard analytical model where the survey isn't the whole thing, it's just an index that the model is tuning to as it tries to replicate what's going on with spiny dogfish, biomass and fishing mortality, and then the different observed data, whether it's catches or the survey. So we're kind of moving away from just depending on the survey to using the survey as a tuning index in a kind of a more modern analytical assessment. Next. Got some input from the AP, and again, a lot of concern about, just depending on the survey. In the dogfish assessment, Andy Jones at the center did some neat CPUE work for the assessment, looking at both trawl observer data and study fleet data to try to develop another index. And so kind of stealing that idea from them as a kind of a quick check on the survey, staff here, me, did a simple catch per observed trawl hour after some filtering to remove really oddball toes or things like that. And, saw a remarkably similar pattern as the trawl survey. I just included it through 2019 in my observer analysis because of impacts from COVID, but you'll see Andy's analysis kind of further follows the survey. So it's not a random survey. It's looking at where people are fishing for other fish, really, and probably trying to avoid dogfish. But so while it's not stratified random design, the power here is you have thousands of observed tow hours each year. Next. And it kind of remarkably followed the trend of the survey. So the blue there is the spring survey, 3-year average line. And then I've got just a calculated observed spiny dogfish annual pounds per trawl hour just from the observer data. And it's, as far as kind of trying to look at these kind of things, that's a pretty tight trend. The correlation was quite high on that. And again, I stopped in 2019, but Andy's work continued. Next. Again, so his model was much fancier than what I'd done, and integrated the trawl observer data, study fleet data, and that the study fleet is less impacted by COVID. It kind of keeps, they have less data loss than the observer data through COVID. But you can kind of see the 2019 point where I left off, and then his analysis kind of continued a downward trend after that in a similar fashion as we just saw with the survey. So there's a little bit of kind of just a check that some other data sources were pointing to a similar trend as we saw with the survey. Next. Yeah, so you can see the spring survey continued kind of downward in a similar fashion as his analysis in the terminal years there. And again, totally different way of looking at it. He's looking at, again, observed trawl data and then study fleet data that he has a way to combine, but kind of saw a similar trend. Next. So our SSC kind of looked at the available information and decided that it makes sense to reduce ABCs at this point. They looked at where biomass seemed to have kind of trended from 16, 17, 18 average to the 21 to 22, 22 average. That was about a 40% decline, or about 11% per year over that time period in the spring trawl data. So they looked at what our ABC would have been in 2019 and kind of reduced it by the same amount. as a kind of way to approximate kind of a reduction, more or less following the council's risk policy in the interim while we're waiting the updated management information from research track assessment. So that ABC is at 7,788 metric tons, and it's less than half of the previous ABC. Next. So from ABC to specs, the quota, we deduct some small amounts for Canada and recreational landings based on recent, history. These are relatively small amounts compared to the ABC. Next. Then discards are a bigger deduction. Kind of often in the past had just been taking an average of recent discards, but we said, well, if we think the ABC should be going down because abundance is going down, if abundance is going down, then so also discards, hopefully. So the monitoring committee decided that it seemed reasonable to scale discards down by that same amount. But you know, it's a lot of uncertainty in this. It would be lower than all the previous estimates, but kind of trying to match the trend that we're seeing in abundance trends. Next. So again, a good bit of uncertainty in that discard set aside, and you know, exceeding that ACL has consequences, maybe damage to the stock, but definitely paybacks. And those in any that occurred in 2023 overages, then the paybacks occur in 2025. Again, it's hard to predict the future, but really not anticipating higher quotas in those years, given the trends and the results of the assessment that we've seen so far. And so, you know, the kind of brings into the question, should there be some kind of management uncertainty buffer? And the conclusion of the monitoring committee, as we kind of looked at the variability in landings and discards, is that in 18% buffer, you know, we did not think that there'd be likely to be large overages, but with no buffer or minimal buffer, there's enough uncertainty, especially on the discard, just random variation year to year, or trends. If the trends in abundance change, you could end up with an ACL overage if there's no buffer. Next. So again, pros, bigger buffers, not going to damage the stock, and you're quite likely to avoid a big overage and not affect those out years, which, while it's going to lower the quota now, it's going to tend towards increase in stability. Next. Of course, on the flip side, we got input that, you know, if landings get down much more than the most they could potentially be with our new ABCs, there's basically one major processor left, and if they exit the fishery, you know, it's not clear, you know, who's going to process that catch. Some either, if not collapse, substantial disruption of the industry. And then if you have a big buffer, you know, you're setting aside a lot of quota year to year, and it seems like you're not going to be catching optimum yield. Next. Pros of smaller buffers, more likely to utilize the full ABC, catch optimum yield, and industry provided input that if there's a quota around 12 million pounds, they say they can hold on for, you know, another year or two. Next. But then again, if we do end up with an overage, potentially you damage the stock, and you're facing deductions for overages in the out years when ABCs may even be smaller to start with. Next. So skipping kind of some of the staff recommendation stages and committee discussions, The Mid-Atlantic Council in New England went with the 0% buffer that leads to a 12 million pound quota. And their rationale was that, yes, there might be some higher risk of overage, primarily due to the uncertainty about expected discards, but industry very clearly stated they're willing to kind of tolerate that risk due to the potential impact of the quota being so low. And then they also, the councils, also kind of discuss it because, well, some of the barriers to the state's trading quota under the commission system have been reduced in recent years. In order to catch that full 12 million pounds, you would have to have kind of very low friction quota transfers. That's not likely to occur perfectly. And so it seemed unlikely that even with a 12 million pound quota here, that it would actually be caught, because while states do trade and try to trade the best they can, they don't want to trade so much away that they disadvantage their own folks. So there's likely some kind of built-in buffer on that 12 million pound quota due to the kind of the allocations through the commission. There's a little extra buffering built in there. Next. And so this is kind of the range of buffers here, going down to that management uncertainty buffer in the middle, 0%, 5%, 13%, 18%. Everything above that is all the same. And then, bigger buffer means smaller quota. And the quota ranges kind of from 12 to about 9 million roughly here. And so the councils, kind of evaluated the potential for underages, overages, the input from industry, and went with that 0% management uncertainty buffer. We don't think that there necessarily will be a quota overage, an ACL overage with that, but certainly with a without a buffer there. And there's no history of overages in this fishery, but with a low management uncertainty buffer or no management uncertainty buffer, it does increase the potential for ACL overages in future paybacks. But that is the recommendation of the councils. That draft environmental assessment for that is under review at GARFO with the NIMS folks right now. Next. And I think that's it. I'll take questions. Thank you.
How about now? Better? All right. As I was saying, are there any questions for Jason on the material he presented? Seeing none, we'll move on to Caitlin, who has a couple slides to lead us into a discussion of the action that we need to take on the specifications.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we just have a couple quick slides here for the board's consideration as you consider the specifications for 2023/2024. So next slide. If the commission were to adopt the 12 million pound quota, which would be consistent with what the councils have done, it would result in these regional and state quotas shown in this table. So I did want to put these up to make sure the board is fully aware of what those would look like in the bottom row in bold. Next slide. And then last year, the commission set the trip limit for the northern region to 7,500 pounds for the 2022 to 2023 fishing year. That was consistent with the change that the councils made to the federal trip limit. That federal trip limit will remain 7,500 pounds unless it's changed by the commission. So because the commission specified it was only for 2022 and 2023, the commission would need to re-specify the trip limit for 2023 and 2024. And with that, I can take any questions or lead into board discussion.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Are there any questions for Caitlin? If not, I think we'd be best served by looking for a motion that would set the quota and the northern region trip limit for fishing year 2023. Is there anyone prepared to do so? John Maniscalco?
So I move to adopt the 12 million pound commercial quota for 2023-2024 fishing year, May 1st through April 30th for spiny dogfish with a 7,500 pound trip limit for the northern region, consistent with the actions of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council and the New England Fishery Management Council.
Thank you, John. Is there a second to that motion? Ray Kane? Is there any discussion from the board on the motion? As this is a final action, is there any public comment? Seeing no hands. We'll see if we can do it the easy way. Oh, there's one hand. John Whiteside, go ahead.
John, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Now I am. Thank you. Yes, if many of you have already heard my comments at both the Mid-Atlantic and New England Council, and I support the 12 million pound commercial quota for 2023-24, and I urge you to do that for just a variety of reasons. That and so please let's not let the last dogfish processor close. Thank you.
It's the easy way. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we'll consider that approved by unanimous consent and move on to the election of a vice chair. Is there anyone prepared to nominate a vice chair for the Spiny Dogfish Board? Chris Bat-Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move to nominate Pat Gear from the Commonwealth of Virginia as Vice Chair of the Spiny Dogfish Board.
Is there anyone that would like to second that motion? Joe Semino, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, congratulations, Pat. Is there any other business to come before the Spiny Dogfish Board today? Tony Kearns, please.
Just a reminder, I think Jason mentioned it, but that the assessment will be the research track assessment will be presented at the Mid-Atlantic Council meeting. Caitlin has the dates, and we will send a reminder email at the beginning of next week, or the link to the council's webpage.
Yep, the council presentation will be on Wednesday, February 8th. They'll start at 9:45 a.m. with Bluefish and then go into Spiny Dogfish. The meeting will end at 10:30 a.m. and we'll resend the link to you all.
Okay, thank you for that reminder. Any other business come before the Spiny Dogfish Board? I'll take a motion to adjourn then. Ray Kane. Russell Dye seconds. Any objections? Seeing none, the Spiny Dogfish Board is adjourned. Thank you.